And with that, I'm going to introduce Jennifer Rooney from the CMO Forbes Network, and I'll throw it to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, hi, everybody. We're excited to have you here. Obviously, you're the reason why we're here, so we love the engagement and all the questions that we've had thus far. So we hope to get more from you. I'm thrilled to be sitting up here with three folks who are going to talk about this concept, this overarching, kind of dig into this overarching concept of creating memorable brand experiences as part of the, kind of the theme of this whole event, which is meaningful marketing. It's a really interesting time in marketing, as all of you know. So much more complexity, and so breaking through, certainly with your brand, but certainly with your brand purpose and meaning, is probably never before has there been as much opportunity, but also much challenge in accomplishing that. So I'm joined by three folks who are going to give very different, I think they're coming from very different points of view, but I'm thinking that all together we're going to kind of end up with a really cool mosaic of what the answer to this question is. So I'm going to introduce my guests, and then they can tell you a little bit about what they do, what their companies do, and how they sort of approach the market. First, I have Jim LECINSKI. He's the Managing Director of US Sales at Google. And by the way, I just want to say, last year at the Notre Dame Marketing Collaboration Summit, Jim gave a presentation on sort of the trends in marketing that CMOs can no longer ignore, and I ended up writing a post on that for Forbes CMO Network, and it's surpassed 16,000 views, so definitely resonated. Obviously, it was an incredible presentation, and Jim has his finger on the pulse of change in the industry. Next, we have Margaret Molloy. She's the Chief Marketing Officer of Siegel+Gale, and Margaret's going to tell you a little bit about Siegel+Gale and provide, certainly the agency perspective on all of this. And then we have Mark FLAHARTY. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Advertising at SundaySky. So Mark can also provide a little bit of insight and perspective on SundaySky and how SundaySky is approaching the market as well. So perhaps, Mark, you can start with giving us a little overview.
Is it okay with you if I start, Margaret? Okay.
We'll go back. We'll do a nice little all over the place, back and forth. And
did you guys bring slides like I did?
Overachiever.
Hi. It's fun to be here. I'm a graduate in 1990. And try to get back here a lot, and I've done a variety of things with the business school over the years, but this is actually more fun for me than going to a football game. So I've spent a variety of years in
this year, maybe.
Well,
yeah.
I caught up with one of my college roommates who lives nearby, and I told him when I walked into his house, I said, there's only one rule tonight. We are not talking about the football team. I spent a variety of years, actually used to work with and for Jim at Google for a number of years, and spent some time at YouTube before it was Google, and Yahoo, and am currently working at a little company that most of you probably don't know. Maybe Denise knows it a little bit because our companies are doing some things together. SundaySky is a technology company that believes that video can be individualized. So our technology works with marketers to use their data to make video different for each individual. So whether it's a marketing message that is delivered to an email, to a phone, via an ad, using that marketer's data to make it personalized so that video doesn't just have to be a one to everybody else. So happy to be here.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Good morning. I'm Margaret Molloy, and as I hope the accent betrays, I'm Irish. And this is my first time at Notre Dame.
And you're dressed appropriately, by the way.
We're all in. So it's a particular thrill to come to Notre Dame. Growing up in Ireland, there's a lot of affinity for things American, and Notre Dame is a brand that is so iconic. I work for a brand strategy firm, one of the leading firms in the world. We are known as Siegel+Gale. We believe, following on Mark's lead, what do we believe in? We believe that simplicity pays. So the brands that we work with, we help them create brand experiences for their clients that embrace simplicity. First time here and really looking forward to your questions.
Great, Jim.
Good. Well, good morning. I'm Jim LECINSKI. I look after the sales and service for Google. I'm in my 11th year at Google. Our team works with brand marketers to help them achieve their business and marketing objectives by reaching our audiences across all of our properties, whether that's search or maps or Waze or Chrome or Android or YouTube, et cetera. So thrilled to be here.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you all. So let's start by talking about this concept of creating memorable brand experiences. And sort of the premise we're going on is, in a world of big data, social media, empowered consumers, and we'll get to that in a minute, and myriad new technologies and channels, what becomes the role of brand and the fundamental elements of marketing? I think there's a lot of discussion, as you all know, among CMOs these days about, certainly the data intuition kind of striking that balance. There seems to be a pendulum shift away from just blind allegiance to data, but I think that's been we've been moving in that direction for a while. However, it's here to stay, and there's incredible power in data, no doubt. So we're going to get into that a little bit, but my first question would be, how do you all sort of define the complexity of marketing today, both the challenges and the opportunities? And maybe, Margaret, you can start, because you use the word simple. I have to imagine that though that seems to be the holy grail, it's probably the hardest thing to achieve right now. Why?
Yeah, that's a great question. You've packed a lot in. I think to get us started, I think about the history of brand and how brand has evolved. Back in, the first known representation of a brand was in Mesopotamia, when the olive companies put their names on a cork, and that represented quality, which is to say, if this oil isn't good, you can come back to me. Years elapsed, if you look at the period in the 1700s when you had Wedgwood and even Heinz emerging, and in that scenario, brand was about consistency. The piece of Delft you bought today is going to be consistent with the piece you buy next week, similarly with the ketchup. Then enter the post-World War era, and the role of brand was different. Brand was about being interesting, because the context was there was more supply than demand. So that was the era of mass marketing, of advertising, of campaigns that became known as Teach the World to Sing, the Coca-Cola campaign. Now we're entering a different era. And I would submit to you, the era we're in now is that brand is of action. It's the experience you create. What does a brand mean? So while it still has to adhere to the principles of brand building around quality, consistency, and interesting, the burden now is brand is about action.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the platforms that sort of exist right now, and getting back to that complexity. Video, certainly, obviously, many of the platforms that we all know very well. Super opportunity, but super challenge there to sort of meet the goals as Margaret has outlined them. Mark, what's your perspective on that?
Well, as Margaret was talking, I was thinking of something that I talk a lot about. I talk a lot about it, I feel like these days, in every aspect of life, and that is that there is a fine line between sophistication and complication. And so in the spirit of being simple, there's so much going on, there's so much to digest, it's so easy to get romanced by what is possible, the art of the possible, but just because it can be done doesn't mean it should be done.
Yeah, that's, I think.
And so, and just because it can be done doesn't mean it's easy to do it. So I find myself a lot, being a company that deals more with marketers, although we, in some ways, should be a lot better, probably could use your help at marketing our own company. But the reality is that what I constantly do is I try to bring it back to focus, and I try to bring it back to, let's really talk about how you can take something complex and maybe make it simple, or at least figure out a way to make it sophisticated, so that, because if complication just gets ugly and people get bogged down, and at least sophistication creates excitement and elicits all the brain waves trying to connect and synapses to get people moving forward. So I think that what it really comes down to is understanding, being focused on, Denise said earlier, eye on the prize, being understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, and then feeding everything into that. And not just saying, oh, I've got all this data, I've got all this technology, I've got all these capabilities. It still comes down to, what is my brand, and how am I trying to interact with my customer?
Yeah.
And I think this is really important today, how do we as customers want to interact with that brand? Because today it's much more about not a brand going out and telling you, the customer, the consumer, what they want to tell you when they want to tell it, but it's when you're receptive to hearing from them. And so I think that focus and simplicity is critical.
Jim, talk a little bit about from where you sit, how you see brands being most successful in terms of, creating that simplicity of engagement, that rich experience.
Well, we have the pleasure and privilege of working with many brands, and in fact, we have a space in New York and a space in California where we do brand workshops, bring brand marketers, CMOs, and their teams through and kind of tease apart and explore some of these kinds of issues for the day. And I think, generally, the questions revolve around who do I serve, what do we stand for, and how are we different? And then that's often answered through, just classic strategic equities and executional equities. I think an interesting area that we're seeing more brands mine to create strategic differentiation is something that's not particularly new, but I think has been out of favor and now coming back a little bit, and that is using brand archetypes, based in sort of Joseph Campbell, hero's journey, those kinds of things. Especially now, like Denise was talking about financial services earlier, some of the big banks now starting to think about, how can they better serve their customers using an enabler archetype. Of course, now you've got 5 big banks all trying to be the same enabler archetype, which makes things very difficult. So then that's where executional equities become very important, whether it's things like sponsorship, colors, sounds, jingles, et cetera.
Thoughts on the role of the CMO and all that, right? Because we heard from Linda Boff last night, we heard from Denise this morning. Where necessarily must the CMOs be pulling the levers and making the decisions? And what challenges are they coming up against, do you think, in sort of executing against that?
Well, interested in your folks' thoughts on this. I would echo Mark's comment that, and as Denise said this morning, the CMO certainly has the continued role to have the vision and drive it, but it's also CMO in partnership with the customers you serve and the internal associates. And so I think the strongest brands are the ones where those 3 pieces of the triangle are in harmony, if you'd agree.
I think that's right. And I think the challenge we're seeing now, if we believe the premise that brand is about experience, it's about the action, it's no longer about words and pictures, then the ultimate challenge is, in many organizations, the CMO is in charge of promise making, not the delivery of the promise. And unless you have oversight of the call center, the retail outlet, even the product experience, particularly in the tech realm, then the experience lies flat unless it maps. The promise and experience must be in sync. And that's the biggest challenge I encounter. We too work with many different clients, and either they must have oversight of the entire experience or deep collaboration with their peers in product and in service.
Because otherwise your marketing is writing checks that your experience can't cash.
And as we've identified in this era, in a world where consumers are talking to each other and we all have the megaphones that we do, that's a very dangerous game to play.
Well, we were just chatting before we came up here with Denise about and I was commenting to her that all of the associate videos that we saw, I find that a lot of companies are very good at doing that at a moment in time, but it seems very much a part of their culture to consistently do that. So I think in that respect, that probably helps to solve some things for her in her marketing organization. But it's somewhat related, but what I find lots of brands talking about today is, how do I create this brand, create this experience, create this image, but still figure out a way to be relevant to the individual? Because we as consumers are the most empowered consumers in history. We do what we want, when we want, how we want, and it's not changing. It's never going back. Right? One of my favorite marketing stories ever was 10 years ago, I read an article in Ad Age where there was a roundtable discussion of network TV executives. And somebody from the Disney world, of course, ABC, ESPN, et cetera, said, and I quote, because this is just etched into my brain, "Yeah, we really let that TiVo thing get out of hand. We're going to have to reel that back in." I thought, wow. No, you won't. No, it's not. That's not coming back.
Right.
But figuring out a way to build that brand, but make it relevant to each person it's actually more and more possible. Google doing so much one-to-one is helping a lot, but it's a real challenge because that can get overwhelming really quickly.
Talk about that, the one-to-one.
Well, I may be a little bit of an outlier because there's a lot of energy, I think, in the marketing space around one-to-one. Always has been with things like direct mail. I'm much more of a proponent, though, or fan of segmented marketing as opposed to going all the way to one-to-one.
Why?
Well, I think because you can get, it's the 80-20 rule, you can get 85% of the benefit with a fraction of the effort and complexity of trying to go one-to-one, especially also, by the way, in regulated industries, where you've got some concerns about credit and fair lending or the pharmaceutical industry, et cetera. It's more ultimately from a regulatory standpoint defensible to do segment marketing as opposed to one-to-one. But I think that's where quintiles, deciles, based on things like lifetime value, you can get a whole lot of value out of that, and then it's just much simpler for your organization to execute it in a decile strategy as opposed to a million different touch points.
Yeah.
That's called focus. Yeah.
Right.
I think what's interesting too, in every category, if you look at the old paradigm of supply and demand, in every category right now, there is more product that is of decent quality than ever before. So not only do consumers have choice and are empowered, as Mark identified, but there's a lot of stuff out there. But something that hasn't changed is there are still only 24 hours in the day.
Sure. Yep.
So getting back to your simplicity point, one of the trends that I've observed among our clients is this quest to, in your marketing, be useful. Because that is a finite resource that we all have, our time. So how can our marketing, while it may aspire to emotional connections, how can it be useful? What are the brand's opportunities to actually be useful in our lives? And some really interesting research came out recently that said consumers are more interested in brands that are useful than interesting.
So let's talk about that utility concept. I mean, a lot of folks have been talking about that for a little while now, and certainly as we move forward with the new technology platforms, I mean, everybody's talking about VR and AR and IoT. I mean, arguably, if you assume the best of that path, talk about brand utility. I mean, that's gonna completely, if everything is a smart object and connected, brand utility takes on a whole new meaning. Can you talk a little bit, can you crystal ball for us a little bit of how you see that playing out and how sort of how do you bring brand simplicity to the fore in that kind of an environment?
Well, the way we think about this is through a concept of an always-on assistant. Like maybe I can ask a show of hands, anybody have an Amazon Echo device at home? Couple, okay. Yeah, try one, play with it. We have a device coming to market shortly. There's some other smart home devices in place, but I think the idea there is to be able to, whether it's to talk to your phone or your car or any device like an Amazon Echo, is to ask it a question, and some of the questions might be of non-commercial nature, like, will it rain in the next hour? But many of those questions will have a commercial flavor to them, right? Like, how late is Best Buy open? Those kinds of things. And so I think what you'll see is, brands increasingly moving to have voice-enabled API connections to those connected home devices, right? So, a useful thing for me to be able to ask is, what's the current balance in my account, right? Like, so those kinds of things on an ongoing, regular basis will provide an increasing level of utility. And by the way, it might just be simply through voice connection like that. Certainly we could have an AR, VR discussion as well if you want to go down that path. But, to tell me what I want from my living room or from my car or from my phone, I think will be an increasing opportunity for brands.
Increasing opportunity, but also if you think about the definition of meaningful, it's one thing for Coca-Cola to go out and say, we like to teach the world to sing as a meaning, right? Being meaningful. But now suddenly being meaningful in an IoT environment, for example, I mean, that's about how is it meaningful just to me, right? I mean, it's hyper-individualized in the moment. Huge opportunity, but also if you get it wrong, there's zero tolerance for a mistake.
I think that's right, and we've all talked a lot about the fact that then in that world, you're no longer compared only to your peer set of 2 or 3 competitive brands. The experience that you provide is now compared to best in class. So just a simple example of this that I use is now at Hilton's, you're able to, when you book a room, you can actually book the room, like room 308 down the hall away from the ice machine, right, as opposed to a King Deluxe. So now that sort of sets the standard, and the reason that that matters is because, for years, when you book an airline seat, you don't get, well, I guess on Southwest, but otherwise you get a seat, not just, right, you get a select seat. So consumers said, well, why can't I do that with my hotel? Or now you think about that when you travel with a rent-a-car. Well, why can't I book the blue Malibu with the leather seats? Why is it just a mid-size car? So you see this sort of experiences in one portion of a category now carrying across to not only the rest of the
That
category,
becomes
but all
the
brands.
standard of brand engagement, period,
Yeah.
no matter what the category. Other thoughts on this?
Yes, so I'll tell you a
vein?
story. Yesterday morning when I was about to board my flight, I tweeted out, going to Notre Dame, forgot umbrella, hope to have a good Irish pub visit. So I arrive at my hotel, I stated the name of the hotel, going to stay at Marriott Fairfield Inn. Arrive at my hotel, on check-in, the associate says, good afternoon, Miss Molloy. I see it's going to rain. Here's an umbrella, and here's a list of the top Irish pubs in South Bend.
That's nice.
Come on.
So raise your...
Really?
So I'm Irish. It's a tall tale. So raise... But raise your hands, those of you who believed that was
That's called light internet
Totally
stalking.
possible, totally possible.
So I tell the story to make a point, not merely to entertain. I have a relatively significant social media following, and I think that sort of anecdote illustrates the realm of the possible.
Sure.
And what we can expect, because what would I have done had that occurred? I would have told many followers through many social media platforms. So take that story as an example of where it's going, where we get to delivering on experiences, because we know what's possible in one category can translate into another. So I share that as illustration of the future. Another example, an irrelevant point, I think, is thinking about location, because location is such where we are physically and what our phone tracks around our physical behavior is such an important indicator of purchase. So I think the realm of bridging brand and intent and attribution will lie in location and mobile. And you've talked about mobile first in a lot of your work at Google. So an example that was intriguing to me, I was at a fashion show in New York recently, and before the show we were all asked to download an app. So we look at the show through the app. Now, granted, there was sort of a bizarre experience, but what was interesting that they were replicating was the idea that instead of just appreciating the beautiful clothing, you could actually see who is the designer, what's the price, and where is that product available nearest to you. So imagine a world where you like Mark's jacket, and you don't just awkwardly go up to Mark and say, nice jacket, Mark, where did you get that? You simply put up the app, and you can say, where's the jacket, where's the nearest one? And
I
then
feel like you're looking through me.
I can see through you. I don't know if I'm looking through you. But I share these as examples of the realm of the possible.
But, oh yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say, that example of augmented reality, I think we as brand marketers can all thank Pokemon Go for bringing back AR from the virtual dead. I mean, it was all about VR for a long time.
That's right.
We've all been to conferences where people said, you can hold up your phone and look at the apartment buildings and it'll show you what the rents are and what's for sale,
yes.
right? And we saw that use case, but it never really took off until earlier this summer with the Pokemon technology. And so I think now that's got a lot of brands that we work with starting to rethink that alongside VR, which I think has certainly much more near-term uptake from brands. Just one example of many that we could cite here, but the Volvo with their new relaunch of the XC90, which won International SUV of the Year at the Detroit International Auto Show, instead of sending out high-cost direct mail pieces, which they normally would, to their target prospects, they sent out a flat pack, virtual reality, cardboard viewer. Load the app, drop your smartphone in, and you can take a virtual test drive. So when you talk about experiences, that sort of changes things very quickly.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Google Cardboard and sort of the history and the story behind that for those who don't know and kind of what the objective is?
So, again, true to sort of our mission and our belief, which is democratizing information for everyone, which again is a little different. I know many of you probably are Apple phone users, and that's great, but that's a phone experience that's built for a slice of the market, whereas we build Android and we try and serve that with a $50 phone for folks in India. So similarly in the VR space, Oculus is a high-end provider. Google Cardboard is the democratized provider, which we have the open source plans for. Like you can literally go to Home Depot or Lowe's and with an X-Acto knife or a pair of sharp scissors make yourself a free cardboard viewer. And there are many resellers who sell them in the cost range of $1, $2 that you can have sent to you. But you drop your smartphone in, you load an app, and then you can have a full 360 augmented and virtual experience. Probably the most notable experience that's publicly available for that is the New York Times is now publishing stories every week where they send their reporters out with a 360 camera, and now instead of sort of seeing it in one dimension or two dimensions, you can stand at the location of the crash site, of the Emmy Awards, the Grammys, et cetera, and experience the red carpet for yourself standing there. And so in many respects, what our engineers are saying is that we've now actually finally built the Sherman and Peabody time machine. For those, anybody remember Sherman and Peabody? Okay,
sure.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure.
The rest of you can Google it. But yeah, so now our engineers are saying that they're recording breakfast conversations, just a morning breakfast with their kids in 360, so that when their kids are 50, 60, 70 years old, they can go back and relive breakfast as their 5-year-old self with their dad as his 30-year-old self.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Mark, let's talk a little bit about, we've seen obviously the rise of the importance of imagery and video, and I mean, huge, right, over the last however many years. Kind of as you look at video as a platform of, and I would argue that content includes experiences, but that's another story. We hear so much about content. I think it's everything. But anyway, video in particular, sort of what's the future of that, and sort of how do you see brands continuing to capitalize on that as a way to build?
Well, I think I'm gonna feel a little twinge of Catholic guilt as I pull my iPhone out after what Jim just said. But as just look at this as a phone, not any particular kind of phone. But I don't think this gets talked about enough, and in some respects, one might argue it gets talked about too much. But as we spend so much time with our world, within inches of our face, video becomes that much more important. And I think it hopefully goes without saying, and probably can't be argued, but the most powerful experiences, most powerful marketing experiences are those that include full sight, sound, and motion. And so when you couple that power with all of the data that every marketer has on us, whether the stories are tall tales or not, Margaret, the opportunity to tell a story to me and beyond brand in video is something that we certainly believe in. We're certainly seeing a lot of power delivered with that. But I think it's particularly important because as we spend so much more time on our phones these days, and I've been doing this for years, I will voice dictate most emails to the point where I'm barely on my laptop. I have it. I bring it with me because I sort of feel like I have to have it, but I spend very little time on it unless I'm doing some spreadsheets or I have to get ready for some meeting where I need different software. But it is because the phone is just an extension of us. Yep. I think that video becomes that much more important because I have yet to really see many engaging experiences on a mobile phone that were powerful that didn't include video. Yeah. So I know that marketers are increasingly trying to figure out how do I tell this story via video, and I can do it in a more nimble fashion, whether it's down to the individual or whether it's down to the segments. Everybody's getting so much better about understanding this set of people can be marketed to in a relatively consistent manner, as can these other segments. But to be able to do that in video with some nimbleness and flexibility and robustness that wasn't available before is very much a reality and only going to increase.
Table stakes, yeah.
Go ahead. Just so I might add on that, Mark, that what that's done for brands then is it's shortened the amount of time or the aperture that a brand has in person to close a sale. So a good example of this is as recently as 2 years ago, the average car shopper visited 5 dealer lots before buying a car. The most recent data that came out from IHS earlier this year is now 2 visits. And how is that possible? That's possible because of all the car videos that you watch in those little snacklet micro moments, whether it's on your phone or on your laptop or at your desk. So that's a important clarion call for brands to say then, if that's how consumer behavior is changing and I can't rely on my Clinique associate at the point of sale in the mall to close you, right? Those customers already come in with a good idea of what they want to buy in a bank branch, in a car dealership, an electronics store, et cetera. So then do you have the video content or assets
Yeah.
to be prepared to win those moments of
Well,
truth
so
before the store?
I interviewed the CMO of Audi not too long ago, and he said just that now it's sort of, you can't beat them, so why fight them, or whatever the term is. But anyway.
Well, but and to the story about checking in at the hotel and what Jim said, and I realize this is the norm because there are not very many out there on the road, but you can buy a Tesla on their app.
Yeah.
And pick exactly what you want.
Yeah.
So you said Audi was the person
Yeah.
you talked to? Yeah, I mean, so I understand that people are not buying their car in advance and then having it built for them very often, but everybody's probably had the experience of, well, I really want the black car with the black leather seats, and you end up with the black leather car and the tan leather seats because it wasn't available.
Mm-hmm.
But you just settled for 4 to 8 years, however long you keep a car, because it wasn't available, right? But that's all changing.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get into sort of what all this means for a marketing organization, right? In terms of talent and sort of skill set and things like that. But privacy, does it even matter? Are we beyond it completely? Everything you're talking about, getting so hyper-targeted and individualized and location-based. I mean, obviously the privacy issue's been talked about now for going on 15 years, but where are we in that life cycle? Do people care anymore?
Well, I'll start. I think, yes, people do care. I would say that there is a range of how much people care, and that would be based on culture. So, for example, in Germany, people care much more than in other parts of the world. Younger people seem to be generally, I'll overgeneralize, a little more open with those kinds of things. But I would say, in general, the 3 pillars still matter regardless of demographic or region, and those are transparency, utility, and control. People need to know and be able to find, what do you know about me as a brand? What are you doing with that, and how do I benefit the utility? And can I control it, meaning opt in, opt out, dial things up, dial things down? And with transparency, utility, and control, I think that's generally how brands are managing through privacy.
Yeah. I think that's an accurate assessment, and I appreciate that's an excellent framework. I think the irony, however, is when we all see those terms and conditions, they are so long, we all invariably, because we're hurried, we just hurry to the last page and hit the accept button. So there's a lot to the letter of the law, but not a lot to the spirit of the law being exhibited by brands. We're working with a number of companies right now in the spirit of simplicity to actually help simplify the contracts, terms and conditions in plain English, to use graphics.
With no attorneys in the room.
Well, with the right quantity of legalese,
Just
right?
plain.
So it's
Yes.
balanced.
Yes.
So I think we're in a stage where there's a lot of acknowledgement of the pillars and of some fear of regulatory issues, but not a lot of action to make it more friendly to consumers.
Privacy matters a ton, and I hope it always does. Maybe to Jim's point, there's a certain numbness at times that we all have, but I think there's more opportunity than there is concern from what I see with regards to privacy, because the opportunity means that something can be more relevant to me. Mm-hmm. So, what I've talked about for years is I don't want to have to go to YouTube and pay a nickel for every video that I watch. So I'm going to accept the advertising. Right? I don't want to have to pay for, we do, by the way, as consumers, pay a lot for our experiences. And we're willing to do that because we have the control over the experience. But to be able to pay for everything is not something that I'm interested in, and nobody is. So I think we're increasingly finding things tilting towards, okay, I will pay for it, and despite all the talk about ad blocking, and yes, it's important that the consumer be in control, to Jim's point, but I think what we're going to see more and more is as marketers are able to make things more relevant to the people who they are messaging, then I'm not going to worry as much about privacy. I mean, I assume people aren't going to be too overt to where I feel creeped out, and any more than I would want somebody following me home from a store that I went to knock on the door to say, "Are you sure you don't want to buy that?"
Yeah.
Right. So provided that we understand that and we keep that true in the digital world, I think that relevance will allow us to take a privacy discussion and make it more about opportunity.
Relevance will trump privacy
No,
concerns.
I didn't say relevance to Trump privacy.
So let's talk, as I started by saying, you all really do represent such different dimensions and roles in the broader marketing industry. And I think, this is such an interesting collection, frankly, of perspectives. And for everybody in the room, I mean, marketing is, as far as marketing opportunity that, marketing industry opportunities that exist, I mean, there's just so many ways to be a marketer today, right? Now, to apply your marketing education, your marketing skills. Talk a little bit about how you feel like specifically your roles, feed up to that ultimate goal of preserving brand, which is, sort of the premise of this discussion. Like for folks, who are just trying to, on the outside, who are trying to understand where your piece fits into the overall puzzle, how would you define that?
Specifically to what my company does today, you mean? Where do we fit into?
Yeah, just like, and from frankly a career standpoint, or from
Yeah.
an aspiring, somebody who wants to be in the industry and is fascinated by the complexity of opportunity that now exists.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound trite, but I don't think it gets enough play when you are thinking about your career. But to focus on what you know and love is, I can't tell you how many people in the last 5 years I've had conversations with. They're just talking about their job and their career and what they want to do, and when they just stop and realize that I'm really passionate about. Now, you can't always make a living at what you're passionate at, right? But if you can try to take what you know and love and apply it to anything that you do, that helps. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I want to get up every morning and be full of learning, challenge, and opportunity and be excited. So I'm always trying to figure out a way to relate what excites me to whatever it is that I'm doing. But I think that there are, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's never been a job, right? It's been about trying to change the world. For me, I have something that I've always referred to as sort of a personal mantra, which is, I call it social responsibility for a digital world. And everybody I work with and everybody that I do business with, I look at them and I say, what are you doing to make this a better digital world today? Right? What are you doing to put it forward? And so for me, it's trying to always put myself last, trying to always put the employees and trying to put the customer first. And because I feel like if I can make them successful, then unless I'm a complete moron in the way that I've set up my business, I should be successful. But so I don't know. I mean, it's in the spirit of simplicity, for me, that's what it's really all about.
Sure.
Is trying to make sure that employees are advantaged, employees are given every opportunity to succeed and set up for success, and that everybody within a company focuses on the success of the customer. And I think that applies to any brand. Right?
But the
Whether I'm a
product that
brand marketer
SundaySky offers
or-
is super critical too, to kind of creating that, ultimately meeting that overarching goal that
Yeah,
brands
I mean,
have.
I feel like our whole objective is to help the marketing world use the power of video to tell a story to an individual.
Which is just so right exactly where everybody is right now as far as their priorities
Yeah,
go.
so I mean, every day I look at people and I say, you answer any question a customer has, I will, in the spirit of transparency and control, I put it in their hands and tell them that all I care about is helping them build a deeper relationship with their customer, because
Yeah.
that should make them more successful.
Perfect. That's great.
I don't know if that's
Yeah,
the
no,
answer
that's
you're looking
wonderful.
for, but
Margaret, thoughts
So-
about where you sit, sort of
Yeah.
your company sits in that equation, if you will.
So our stage is a little different. We're a brand strategy and design consultancy. So for me, it's about understanding your purpose as a brand. What is the intersection with how you make money, what sets you apart, and what's the larger world issue that you're helping to address as a brand? Then to cascade below that, how does the brand come to life? What are the words? What are the pictures? What are the brand experiences that our clients invoke for their customers? So that's where we sit in that spectrum. It comes to life and should come to life through digital experiences, through video, and many of the other challenges and opportunities it presents. So for me, it's about being strategic. That's the critical part. From sort of looking at a marketing opportunity set, I think something we haven't touched on, but we've implied throughout the conversation is marketing's changing. We're all required to be more innovative than ever before. And when I reflect as a marketer how you achieve that, it's through diverse thinking. So I commend Jenny for putting together a diverse panel. Personally, when I go out, I'm trying to meet people who are different from myself. So designers, journalists, athletic coaches, all the people from whom I can learn from. And that's the counsel I would offer to everyone here in the room. Expose yourself to different parts of marketing, but to be a really strategic and connected thinker, draw outside your own field for innovation.
That's great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, to the extent that we all believe the role of marketing is to drive incremental profitable growth for the enterprise, that is why enterprises exist, right? So to be a marketer is to be elemental to the core purpose of a business. We've had traditional tools on how to do that. We all learned sort of the classic 4 Ps. That still matters, that still exists. But as consumer behavior is radically changing, like we've been talking about here during our conversation this morning, the Nielsen data now in the U.S. at least shows that time spent with digital devices each day, it now surpasses time spent with television, about 4.5 hours to about 5.25 hours, and now in favor of digital, most of that growth in mobile. So now this means to be a great marketer means you not only have to be a great digital marketer, but you also have to be a great mobile marketer. So it's knowing the classical or legacy 4 Ps traditional approach, but it's no longer optional if you want to be a career marketer to not know digital or to not know mobile. There was a point not that long ago, 2 years ago, when you could say, well, I'll take care of the classic stuff, and there's somebody across the street in a different building on a different team who will handle all the new stuff. Well, you all know that demarcation no longer exists. We all have to know, quote, that new stuff and, quote, that old stuff, because it's less and less differentiated.
And in fact, in some organizations, they're doing away with the use of the term digital completely for that reason. So I think
Let me add one quick thing, and I hope this resonates for lots of folks in the room. It was a really sort of fun moment for me. I was just chatting with Margaret, and Denise and I were chatting before we came up here, and we were just chatting about the Olympics that she talked about, and I said, okay, so you spent $7.5 million, you were supposed to spend 40. That must have been an interesting conversation to have with NBC. And ultimately, the quick answer was they wouldn't give me the digital media unless I bought the TV. I mean, it was just, Jim, when you and I worked together at Google not too long ago, it was just the opposite. They threw the digital to you if you bought the TV. And so here we are in 2016, I won't let you buy the digital unless you spend all this money in TV. Just really kind of cool as people who've worked in this digital industry for a while to see that flip happen and relatively quickly and in a big way with the Olympics.
Yeah. I think I'm sensitive to time. I don't know how we are doing on time, but I want to give everybody in the audience a chance to ask questions. Sure.
A couple of years ago, I was talking to someone senior in the marketing advertising field, and they were talking about brand trust erosion. And they talked about back in my parents' day, I won't say how long ago that was, but everybody trusted Procter & Gamble, and it went on. And he said, today, people no longer trust brands. Now, in the meaningful marketing and connection to people, where does the panel think that brand trust is going? We have things like, the trust example, it doesn't come to mind, but Wells Fargo, all of a sudden you go, holy shit, sorry. But can you talk about brand trust?
It's a technical term.
What?
Yeah, maybe I'll lead with that. I think Certainly, trust has shifted. The latest studies suggest that we trust more what our peers share than what brands propagate. Nonetheless, I think brands can't abdicate from having a purpose and living to it. So you still need to articulate what is your purpose and deliver on that promise. And I say the challenge is there are many more sources of verification, particularly associated with your peers, in terms of how you do that.
Yeah, and I would just say, expect that things that you do that are out of tune with your purpose or your external message will find the light of day, right? To sort of say, well, don't worry about where we source that from, you know, we don't disclose that. It will be disclosed.
And I think an important adjunct to that, too, is that as brands are becoming more human, they're exhibiting more of the qualities of humans. They make mistakes. So how you handle mistakes is very much an opportunity to evoke trust. The other dimension to be mindful is that brands are now becoming much more a part of ourselves, our identity. So it probably was always the case. Whatever car you drove was a representation of yourself. That phenomena, particularly when you layer it with customization, what color car, but so much of what we do as consumers, so much of the brands we consume become part of our identity. So this treating trust in isolation now, it's just become a more complex calculus.
I wanted to add something or build on that a little bit, and I don't know if it directly answers your question, but I do think I'm super interested in the fact that being meaningful and being trustworthy doesn't mean being liked by everybody. I think that's been the case for a while, but now more than ever, I think we see brands like Honey Maid or Donate Life America just came out with that World's Biggest Asshole campaign. I mean, they did it to reach a specific target, and they knew in making that choice they were going to really turn off and make a lot of people angry. And obviously, it's just like anything, you know, shunning people just for the sake of doing that in an inauthentic way, people see through that right away. But just putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is who we are, take us or leave us. I think never before have we had brands have never before had the ability to do that and the platforms through which to do that. And frankly, you know, people being liked isn't the same as being respected, right? So I think brand respect is very possible.
It's so funny. That's exactly what I was going to add. Is it just comes down to respect, and I don't think that I think that sort of popular line of thinking is unfair, and I don't really think how do I say this without sounding rude? I think the people who really have popularized that way of thinking are just ignorant, because the reason they say we trust brands. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to raise hands, but I'm going to guarantee you that everybody in this room, at least once a day, trusts Google, right? I trust Google multiple times a day, and it's a verb now, right? It has been a verb for a long time. So, but because we're in control, we get to choose what we trust and what we don't trust, and what brands we interact with and what we don't. So I think it just comes down to the brands recognizing that I can't just tell you what I want to tell you when I want to tell you it. I have to be ready to embrace you when you're ready to be talked to or ready to be engaged. And so I think because we're so in control of what we do, we are choosing where to engage. But every time you make a choice, that's trust. So I think people trust brands as much, if not as much as they ever have. But I think it's those big iconic brands that might be a little watered down because we no longer feel like we are one country that is marketed to. We are a country full of 300+ million people who want to be marketed to differently. So I think it's that empowerment that creates a disconnect for brands. But I don't know, it's changing. I was talking to some folks at Hilton not too long ago, and I stopped the woman that runs a chunk of their marketing in mid-sentence. And because she said something that was so shocking to me, I wanted to see if she actually meant it. I said, I'm really sorry, stop. She spoke in terms of, I wish I could remember exactly how she said it, but she was speaking in terms of marketing, because some of the stuff I've said, talking to a customer when they want to be spoken to. And I said, was that a misstep? Did you mean to say that? And she said, oh, that's how we speak. That's everything we talk about now. In the last year, we've changed. It's not about what we want to send out, what we want to do. It's about you're the customer, you're going to come to us, and when you do, we're going to be ready to give you the experience you want. So I just think it's flipped a bit.
And just to synthesize that, when we talk to clients, we say, just because we're always on as consumers doesn't mean we always want to hear from brands. Modality matters.
Yes.
What mode are you in? Are you leaning in? Are you in shopping mode? Are you in weekend mode? So being mindful of modality is vitally important.
All right, let's thank our panel.